We're going to look at section 172 and 173 today. 172, Jesus is scourged and mocked as King of the Jews. And then the next subsection, which is going to be the crucifixion. We'll pick up the one question, number one, from section 173, Simon of Cyrene carries the cross of Christ. Okay, question number 959 we start off with, which is, after scourging Jesus, what did Pilate do? And this is going to be based on John 19, verses 4 to 6. Pilate therefore went forth again and saith unto them, Behold, I bring him forth to you, that ye may know that I find no fault in him. Then came Jesus forth, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate saith unto them, Behold the man. When the chief priests therefore and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate saith unto them, Take ye him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. So after scourging Jesus, what did Pilate do? The answer is, see, he declared that he found no guilt in him, but assented to let the Jews crucify him. Okay, so when you look at A and B, he declared him guilty and sent him to his crucifixion. No, he did not declare him guilty. Never did declare him guilty. Or he declared that scourging was enough. No. Okay, so the offer of scourging was not part of any judgment. Okay, although scourging was done as part of the process of crucifixion, it was done to weaken the person, to be able to have them die faster. In fact, if you read The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, he goes into extreme detail on just what all is involved. I'm pretty sure it's that book that I saw it in, and I had to stop reading because it was actually too much to bear. Okay, but the fact, Pilate did not explicitly state that he hoped the scourging would be sufficient. He did not state that. But the fact that he followed up by declaring that he found no guilt in him should have interrupted the process. That should have interrupted the process. By scourging Jesus, Pilate would have been able to confront them with the fact that action had been taken. He could have said, hey, look, I did something. Isn't that good enough? Even though Jesus should have been dismissed due to lack of guilt. And so C, declared that he found no guilt in him, sends the Jews to crucify him. This is a repetition of his verdict, which should have been taken by the Jews as another chance to back off. Okay, all along, they keep having these chances to be confronted. It's like one moment after another. Of course, by allowing the Jews to take Jesus, when they could have stopped the proceeding, does make him responsible. This reminds us of politicians who say they take full responsibility, but then do not position themselves to take any consequences. That's one of those things that bugs me out there. I think to myself, if I were president, I would have some fun. I would go to a press conference, and then I'd hold up a bumper sticker here and a slogan there and say, here, this is what you want. And I'd start talking, then I'd say blah, 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 blah. You know the routine, right? Okay. Politicians, they say stuff. Actually, they try to avoid saying stuff. I am just amazed at how blatant it is and how there's no shame when they're asked a question and they just do not answer the question and they just talk about other stuff. Just completely unrelated stuff. But probably about the worst thing I've ever seen is the politician who says, and I take full responsibility for this. Right. You take no responsibility. They are taking zero responsibility. They say, the buck stops here. Okay? Well, I know that the bucks do stop into the pockets of politicians a lot of times, but when they say I take full responsibility, they end up taking none whatsoever. I mean, responsibility is you take you pay the consequences. I don't see them resigning from office. I don't see them taking it out of their own pocket to pay off things. I see nothing. I'm sorry? Or going to jail. No responsibility whatsoever. And so this reminds us, you know, the Jews, they just say, yeah, fine, put it on us. They actually do not take any responsibility. Either way, whether by passing the buck or only saying you are responsible, there's no judging the actual responsibility. I'm sorry, there's no dodging the actual responsibility, no dodging it. This is one of the discussions we had from last week that was a question to people about the verdict. The verdict is a verdict. Remember, you got to remember that a verdict is the declaration of guilt or innocence. That's all a verdict is. Okay? The sentencing is different. Pilate did not sentence them. He gave them over to the Jews to execute what they would. But as many people pointed out last week, he still did have responsibility in the situation, just like these politicians today who claim responsibility but will not take responsibility. They really end up being held responsible anyway, at least at the voting booth, we hope. Yes, Brother Tone. Our microphones are all up here. And that's on now.
I read a commentary about this event. Pilate would have written the what do you call this, the crime Christ committed in the inscription. Instead, he wrote the King of the Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews, which is an affirmation against what the Jews believe to be blasphemy, because he claims to be the Son of God. And Pilate, after the conversations with the wife, he had some dreams about that, and then Jesus confronted him with the issue of there's no power that can exercise except from God, he said. So all these things must have brought about some conviction in his conscience, and he wrote what he wrote. And because he even said, "I wrote what I wrote."
Yeah. So it's a further affirmation of his actual verdict. Yeah. Now something I think I'm going to refer to it later on in the studies as we get through more and more. Pilate. I had read, a long time ago, before looking any further, that Pilate ended up feeling so guilty that he might have committed suicide after this. But there's actually various accounts. We don't have a lot of assurance of exactly what's the right account. One account is that he actually got saved after this. There's a statement about that, but it's just as reliable as anything else, which means it's not reliable exactly what. But that would be interesting to me if he'd actually done that. So, and that which would say that maybe when he was writing that inscription, if it's the case that he did believe later on in life,
maybe that's
that
correct, Pastor.
Something.
Because he cannot be writing all he wrote it in 3 languages.
Yeah,
can
make
there
no
be
mistake
any,
about it.
Can there be any doubt about what he was thinking?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Maybe that's maybe it was more than just a sniping at the Jewish leadership. Maybe he was actually revealing something, for all we know. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember is don't forget the testimony of his wife.
Yes.
So that could have played a factor in both, and maybe he was in the very uncomfortable position of trying to get out of doing that. I have the feeling that he saw enough of, just like I speculated earlier, that I think that the Pharisees knew who Jesus was by the time they went and sent him to the to be crucified. And I wouldn't be shocked if Pilate knew that there was, he knew that they sent him for envy. So why would they be envious of him? And then maybe he put all the pieces together. So
Yeah. Who knows? Yeah.
You know, it is very possible, because I did read similar accounts about that there was some story circulating from around that time that Pilate and I think Pilate and his wife did get. I mean, again, that's, it's speculation, of course, and in retrospect, but I had heard that before too.
Yeah. I think it's important to keep in mind that though he was the Roman governor at that time, that he had shaky relations with the Jews. It was not just an administrative thing that he had. He was in a little bit of jeopardy with his relationship with them. Not just they were giving him trouble, of course they were giving him trouble, but to the point that he did have some worries over this. Yeah.
Also, Jesus quoted earlier in his ministry the two incidents reflecting the character of Pilate when he massacred a group of people in Galilee or Capernaum, something like that. When he was asking who was at fault, were those that were it includes the other. That's the character of Pilate. He is very ruthless.
Yeah.
Yet during the time of his trial, with Jesus' trial, Pilate was not his only cruelty was to the extent that he scourged him. Yeah.
And which again could speak to was something going on in his heart. Okay, question 960. How did Pilate react to the Jews revealing their original charge of blasphemy? And this is John 19:7-8. This is where things get muddy for them now, for the Jews. The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." Shock! Admitting it. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was the more afraid. And so the answer is B, he became fearful of Jesus. Okay, now A and C are interesting things. He got fearful because only Caesar could claim worship, or C, he became bold because he hated superstition. Well, it is true that only a deceased Caesar could be worshipped. Okay, a deceased Caesar could be worshipped. But this gave a sense of honor to the living Caesar. This would not have caused Pilate to be fearful of Christ, but if anything, willing to change his mind and have Christ killed. I mean, that if it was a question of competition with Caesar, he could have had him killed for that. The fact that he became fearful instead lends itself to making the very thoughtful Pilate look like he was feeling some persuasiveness to the truth of Christ. For C, he became bold because he hated superstition. Well, also as a thoughtful man, Pilate might not have been subject to superstition. The fact that he did not become emboldened speaks of him not seeing Christ in a superstitious light. So being boldened, he could have done something more about that. So by becoming fearful, Pilate demonstrated a sense of sobriety that since the Jews had been playing with him deceitfully, maybe the opposite of their claims were trustworthy. His reaction to Christ was more appropriate as one who was realistic and could see the possibility that Jesus was actually more than just innocent of the Jews' charges. Scholarship is pretty inconclusive of what became of Pilate. I do have it in my notes here. With what appears to be equal questions about a possible suicide or even a possible conversion to Christianity later. This reaction would certainly be consistent with a later conversion, so that possibly can't be ruled out altogether. Okay, 961. What did Jesus say about Pilate's responsibility? It's based on John 19, verses 9 to 11. It says, "And went again into the judgment hall, and saith unto Jesus, Whence art thou? But Jesus gave him no answer. Then saith Pilate unto him, Speakest thou not unto me? Knowest thou not that I have power to crucify thee, and have power to release thee? Jesus answered, Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore he that delivered me unto thee hath the greater sin." So the answer is A. Okay, Pilate had no power except from God, which would have reminded him of his highest responsibility. When we look at B and C, Pilate had a responsibility to Caesar to appease the Jews. Okay, or Pilate had no responsibility because God was making him fulfill prophecy. God was forcing him to fulfill prophecy. No, well, Jesus did not let Pilate off from any responsibility by excusing him because of Jewish pressure, nor because of some sense of fate because of God being a puppet master. He's not getting let off the hook in any way. Jesus simply brought Pilate to call before God. Ultimately, it is not people that we answer to, nor can we just pretend that God must be behind it because he's letting something happen. Each one must give an account to God, and Jesus was calling Pilate into account before God. Okay. Anybody want to inject anything in there before we move on to the next question? Okay. Question 962. Since Pilate found no guilt in Jesus, it was logical to affirm the claim that Jesus was king. How did the Jews demonstrate their depravity? This is despicable. This is verses 11 to 15. Jesus answered, "Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore he that delivered me unto thee hath the greater sin." And from thenceforth Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, "If thou let this man go, thou art not Caesar's friend. Whosoever maketh himself a king speaketh against Caesar." When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus forth and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in the Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was the preparation of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. And he saith unto the Jews, "Behold your king." But they cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate saith unto them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So the answer is, see, they pledged their allegiance to pagan Caesar rather than accept Pilate's conclusion of innocence. For A, they suborned bribed officials to add false witness against Jesus. Well, they were not beyond bribery and had even suborned false witnesses in the trial before the high priest. And bribing officials would actually have been less dastardly than what they did do. I mean, swearing allegiance to a pagan king or indicating allegiance to a pagan king was worse than bribing officials. For B, they demonstrated a lack of commitment to truth by changing their charges against Jesus. Well, they had not changed their charges, actually. What they did was just reveal their true charges so that they were actually being more honest. The ultimate hypocrisy was revealed in that the thing they hated the worst, allegiance to a pagan king, was what they swore to rather than let the innocent Christ go. This is often the case with false ideologues. In their extreme commitments, their hypocrisy renders them unbelievable. Extreme commitment is not necessarily bad, but the stronger the statement one makes, the stronger their arguments, which include their personal consistency, must be. It's not just their potential statements, but everything about them counts as well. And I think the hypocrisy when I think we've talked about this before, when the same politicians under one administration will be all in favor of something, and then the next administration comes along and they can reverse themselves completely and sound just as committed and just as, oh, this is the worst thing in the world. This is the worst thing in the world. And it just comes back to bite them. So what is it, the worst thing in the world, or you're all in on it? Okay. Question, let me see, section 173, the next section. So the crucifixion starts here, section 173. We just have one question to go here. Okay, we read Romans 16:13 and Acts 19:33. As Mark was careful to point out the sons of Simon, what blessing did Simon the Cyrenian have? And this is a little bit hard to follow sometimes. Did anybody get it right before they looked it up in the back? Anybody figure it out?
Carried the cross for Christ.
Okay. He carried the cross of Christ, and he also bore two servants of Christ. Okay. Two sons, yeah. Two sons who were known as servants of Christ. Yes. I'm excited.
I said when I read Romans 16 and Acts 19, the verses there, I cannot figure it out until, I just put two together.
Yes.
Because of Mark 15, which says that, the whole thing, the father of Alexander and Rufus.
Right, exactly.
That means they are his sons, and they were the servants of Christ. So those are the two things that he got from
That's
carrying
exactly
the bargain.
it. Yeah. The gospel verse. I don't put the gospel verses in. I make you dig a little bit. So yeah, when you saw the Mark one, then you get to see why Romans 16:13 and Acts 19:33 makes sense. Now, there's no indication or tradition about the faith of Simon of Cyrene. So we do ask, could his experience have affected him so that he influenced his son's faith? Well, we don't know exactly, but it's important to consider that for those who come into contact with Christ, they can't help but be touched. And by one means or another, you can't really have contact with Christ and not have some effect on your life. But he gets to have his name written down in the book forever. Yeah, Miss Nancy.
I think I missed the scripture for 962.
Okay, for 962, it is John 19:11 to 15. For 962, John 19:11 to 15. You kind of wonder what Simon might have thought years later. What reflections would you have if you knew you were the one to help carry the cross of Christ? Okay, that's the last question there for today. Any other thoughts anybody would like to share? Ms. Wilma.
I don't think he had a choice of carrying the cross. I think the Roman soldiers made him.
Yeah, she says doesn't think he had a choice. The Roman soldiers made him. So you gotta wonder what's going on in his head. But the fact that he had his sons after that sort of speaks, maybe, yeah. If he didn't have a thought before, he certainly had one later on. Brother Tone.
He must be a believer because he's from Cyrene and probably was a believer.
He must have been a believer because he was from Cyrene and what?
Simon must have been a believer and he went to Jerusalem as a pilgrim for the feast.
Okay, does not necessarily make it so, but it does support it. The fact that he was from Cyrene and he was there in Jerusalem for the feast, he was at least some kind of believer in God. The problem is he could have been a believer in the Jewish legal system also, so we don't have an indication one way or the other. But it does certainly speak to the fact that he's had a sense of spirituality about him.
In the Roman tradition, I think the guilty party really carries the bar of the cross.
Yeah.
In this case, I read the commentary that it says that because Jesus is not guilty of anything, somebody has to carry.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody has to carry the beam for him.
Yeah. At least figuratively speaking, that would be true. Yeah.
Yeah. And unless a person is saved, Pastor, he is really guilty. guilty of sin.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Simon, because we are not sure whether he may have been a proselyte to Judaism but not to Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah.